What we're going to find out about today is how much does it cost to make and release a record. And I'm being helped today by Lorraine Macaulay, Alex Knight and Lester Dales, who have different perspectives on making and releasing records. We're going to start with Lorraine, who releases a record solo on her own.
Thank you. Hi. So I self-released my debut album. So I just want to talk to you about the costs involved in that today, but and how we've survived as unsigned artists so far. So I thought I'd just give a quick introduction by how much this video of ours cost. And how we survive on a shoestring. So this video cost us £1,200 to make, and that money was on lighting, props, and on the video makers. And then everything else we asked for, we borrowed or we collaborated on. So we borrowed the place, that's my cousin there, and that was his artist studio, so we borrowed that for 2 nights running. The clothes were our own or borrowed. We got hair and makeup from volunteers as well. And basically, that's how we survived, and we used the same method through the album. So I'll just start with that. So like I said, ask, borrow and collaborate, and kindness. So my background, I'm an environmental scientist, was my degree. And I actually worked in environmental and social change as a project manager, working in charities. So I think I kind of knew a lot about social capital and people getting involved as volunteers behind a cause. So that kind of helped. But I think that music has a similar feel about it, that people help out just because of the passion and because they love it. So when we made an EP, I went to the local music shop, Coda Music, and I gave them my EP, and they said they really loved it, and if we were to make an album, that they would get us distributed. So that kind of got me thinking, well, why don't we give that a go? So with In Kind and the kindness of musicians, artists, and studio rehearsal space project management, all that was in kind. We'll put that together, and then we did a pledge music campaign where we earned £2,500, which covered the costs that we couldn't do in kind. So that's mastering, printing, and a 3-month album launch promotion campaign. So just to break down what that money looks like, so though it was in kind, it's people's time, and I thought for today we would try and cost that out. So the pre-production stage, well, the songwriting, if you're trying to quantify that, it's quite hard to calculate how long it takes you to write a song, because I know I think about a song for a couple of months before it actually comes out, but I just kind of thought I put those hours together as in 4 days per song, 10 songs in the album, 40 days. And if you're on the minimum wage, getting paid for that work, it would be £6.50 times the 8 hours of that day times the 40 days. So about £2,000. So I won't go through every calculation like that, but that's how I've been working things out. So basically, this is Nick, who plays the fiddle in my band, and he lives in the countryside in an old school house. So we were very lucky. We went there for weekends to do our pre-production. So we spent 3 weekends there. So that meant that we didn't need cash to pay for the rehearsal space, but we did have to pay for the travel, but we didn't need any money for the accommodation either. So, but we've calculated what we would have needed to pay for those things. So all these are in-kind costs of our pre-production stage, coming up to £5,599. So the recording stage, this is Johnny in the band, and he is a sound engineer as well. So we were lucky in the fact that the perk of his job was that he could record his own private projects when the studio was closed. So that meant that he was the producer of the album and recording it, but it meant that we recorded in the middle of the night. So that meant when the studio closed, we go in at 12 o'clock and stay till like it opened again. If we could make it through the night, we would stay till like, we probably were about to pass out about 7 in the morning. So, but sometimes I would go there as well before work. So I would go get up at 5 in the morning and go, and we we could record until 12 until the studio opened. So we did that for on and off for about a year. So we all aged a lot, but we got it done in kind, and we stayed in each other's houses, and I brought food. So the one thing that you can't scrimp on is that you all need to eat. So and that total recording costs of things in kind came to 12,449 if we were paying for everything with cash. So the other thing that's required in doing all this is the ongoing project management of it. So like I said before, I was a project manager in the past, so I think that helped a bit. But again, I was just learning as I went and reading stuff like on CD Baby, DIY Musician, and being inspired by other musicians that were just getting on with it and doing it now that the kind of tools were available. But so these are all the kind of jobs that I had to do along with the recording. So like coordinating the band for the pre-production and the recording sessions. So just making sure everyone's there and we have suitable dates, attending band recording sessions, mixing, editing, stages, distributing material prep with music shop, preparing the promo campaign material for the website and the social media, and then the kind of registering your songs with PRS, PPL, and then working with the artist on the artwork as well, so developing that with time, and then coordinating the printer and all that. So the kind of endless list, but I tried to work it all out at how many hours I approximate that I put into that, and again, doing it at minimum wage. So about £5,000 worth of project management work. So I think I have been not overestimating the hours. If anything, I've tried to kind of be on the other side. So the summary of the cost then is that our in-kind contribution as a band all totals up to about £24,000 worth for pre-production, recording, artwork and project management. The cash costs, so we needed to pay for things like the printing of the CD, the mastering of it, and to get a 3-month album promotional campaign, because I suppose we started to do the project because we wanted to share our music with more people, and we in order to get more festivals and more gigs, we knew that we needed more reviews of our music. So that was really important part of it, and we got a discount on that as well. So the pledge campaign, so we decided we didn't have the cash to meet this, so we thought, why don't we do the pledge campaign? I had a few friends in Ireland that had successfully launched their albums with that. So we set up a pledge campaign and we raised £2,500. So that was great, which meant then you have to pledge 15% of that. So we were a little bit short on, so we put in money ourselves, which we repaid ourselves then with the sales of the CD. So how much is the music? If we were to put the total cost of the album in kind and cash together, the album was about £26,000. So that means that each track costs about £2,600. So our album sales and income is about 8,000. So if we're counting our in-kind time, we've so far lost about 16,000. But which I'm sure economists would not count it as income or profit, if we would say that we made 8,000 cash, we've used that income for music videos, for topping up gig fees, and for putting seats in our van to go on tour last year. So I couldn't go ahead and do the second album the same way because we put in so much time and we're up through the night and everything, and some of the guys have kids now, and there's things that you just can't do when you're heading for the second album.
Thanks very much. That was very clear. Alex, if you'd like to step forward and talk about it from an independent label perspective.
my figures are going to be based on one act. This is a real budget that I did put together for one of my artists for a debut record. Just so we know, we're quite clear this is a debut album campaign. I start from a different place. I start from how many will I sell, and taking into consideration who the artist is, what their background is, what they've done already. And I start with what I consider to be pessimistic sales for that act. And I think we'll come on to why. So here's my sales, 6,000 units, pessimistic. And at the same time, you have to take into consideration how many you're going to manufacture and at what cost. CD, vinyl, and you'll see that the CD costs and the vinyl costs are not low, they're not cheap. And the reason being, you have to have value in your product. So coloured vinyl, gatefold album release is not £1, it's £3, £2.70 a unit to make, but it gives you value. The same with the CDs. So what did the record actually cost to make? Did the artist take an advance? Yes, they did, and it's quite a considerable advance. Were there any recording costs? Yes, there were. There was £10,000 worth of recording costs on top of the advance, and that includes all the album costs and single B-side costs. The cost of manufacturing, we saw the prices before my sales. It gives you 9,000, 10,000 in manufacturing. Artwork costs. So someone has to create those beautiful packages that we sell. There's a cost involved to that. So you have designers that you work with, production people that you work with that create these for you. There's a price to that. Same with mastering. You have to master your album. There's a cost to that as well. So there's the costs there. And then I have to think about what will it cost the label to generate those sales. So what assets do I need to create? We need to create videos for your acts. You have to have photos. So these are in there. So the video cost, that's for 3 videos. That's 3 singles. So £1,500 per video. What team do I need to employ? You have online PR. You have print PR. You have international people that work your campaigns. They're PR in France, a PR in Germany. You have a radio plugger. They're £1,500 a single to get your track taken to radio. So these costs need to go into your budget. Oh, touring. There's a touring expense. Bands need to tour to help you create, help you promote your sales. And this is where they like to come and hang out when they're touring. Other costs that you need to consider. Your distributor will charge you for distributing your titles. You have to pay mechanicals on your product, whether it's by what you're selling or what you're manufacturing. You have to put those into your budget. You may need to pay a producer a royalty on your sales. That would need to go into your budget. So there's additional costs that you need to consider. Retailers need incentives. And quite often, if you want to put a significant amount of units into a store, they may ask you for a format which is exclusive to them. So this product was only available in rough trade. And they came to us and said, we want to stock this record, but we don't want to stock the same record that everybody else is stocking. We would like to take a big number of units if you can give us something that's exclusive. So this is a prime example. We did a clear vinyl for rough trade only, but it pays dividends. They take a big order. Where are we? My income through the sales, my pessimistic sales, is 50K. Note that there's some zeros in here. My costs, 101,000. My summary is I worked it out at £6,783 a track. and these are, part of my budget. There's my house burning down. But are we done? Well, we're not quite done there. We have an office in the US, and the budgets we've been looking at are solely for my UK and European sales. I have to run a very similar campaign in the US, which has additional costs. The additional costs were $42,000 or £28,000 on top of the costs you saw earlier. My summary worked out it was £8,687 per track. So quite significantly different to yours. But there are other factors that will come into play, or hopefully come into play. I said about the figures at the start, I start with pessimistic sales figures. And this would be a worst case scenario. And you have to imagine that for us, we have 12 or 15 releases per year. And those releases are at different parts and different cycles of the contract period. So if you're investing in a debut act, in a debut band, you're starting from nowhere, really. You don't know what the sales will be. You start low, and you may need to invest more heavily in that artist for a debut album than you need to invest in that artist for their second album or their third album. You're trying to actually push them and spend the money with the right teams to actually get their head above the parapet. So you get some key press, you get key radio, you get them established on the live circuit. Hopefully they get to a point on the initial album campaign that they can sustain themselves on tour, both in the UK, Europe, and in the USA going forwards. Therefore, some of those considerable costs are no longer there as you move into album 2 or 3. I didn't factor in other revenue streams, so there's no sync income. One sync or 2 syncs in the UK and Europe or in the USA can radically change the revenue streams, how much money comes in. It won't change the cost of the track, but it will change how much money you earn from the sales of that album. And so, that's the difference for us, is I think we are looking at these projects as part of an ongoing campaign amongst other projects that run throughout the year. Whereas I think Lorraine is looking very specifically at her release and what can she do next to make her next release better, or different, or more cost-effective, whereas we're trying to run a business full-time. The other thing to consider on my set of figures here is that there's no overhead. There's none of the time spent working from within the label, or the overhead of the label, the staff costs at the label. Those aren't factored into my budgets. These budgets form part of a much broader and wider budget that I use and work through every year, which does incorporate every release throughout the year and pulls everything back to a summary page at the front, whereby it has my overheads, it has all my releases, it has my historical catalogue sales, and that gives me a year figure as to whether I'm up or whether I'm down. So that's how we look at these figures.
Thanks very much. So Lester, can you give us the insights in the kind of typical thing that a major label might do? And I should emphasise that Lester actually isn't from a major label. Lester is an accountant. So we've asked him to just use his experience about the kind of figures that would be involved in the release for a major label.
Okay, thank you. As you say, I see this very much from the artist side. I represent quite a lot of artists who are signed to major labels. So if we could move along. The major label costs really fit into four broad areas. They're A&R costs, marketing and advertising, in-house costs, and variable costs when they start to sell. And again, very similar to the independent label, before they sign an artist, they consider, you know, their targets, the levels of income that they hope to generate. I think as well as taking a singular view on those artists, they also take a global view in respect to their company vis-a-vis market share, and it bears in mind when they start doing other deals with the likes of YouTube and other sources of income that generate income, and also that is sometimes generated on a more global basis. Here's a sort of typical, quite a large signing for a first artist album cycle. I've put in there an advance of £150,000. I'm sure there's a lot of people who'd be very happy to receive an advance of that size, but typically an artist signing to a major label will have a manager. They'll pay 20% of that to a manager. Normally they'll have legal fees. Thankfully they'll have some accounting fees. They will also want to take a wage. So and usually typically I've based my figures on an 18-month album cycle. So if there's 4 people in a band and maybe over a year, they're going to get £15,000, £18,000 each as a salary over that 18-month period. Then that label will usually give a tour support budget. Again, depending on the genre of the artist, the size of that budget will differ, but I've got in here £85,000. Which again is a lot, and will enable them to go and tour and promote their record, well, before and after the launch. It should be said though that that money doesn't come free. You have to repay it out of the artist royalties that you earn, but these days also most major label deals will expect to take a percentage of your net profits from touring, merchandise, and sometimes website profits. So taking that money comes at a price, but you have little option. It's what most of them want now. I've allowed there £15,000 for 3 videos each, and usually 50% of that cost is recoupable against your artist royalties, and the other 50% against any income that those videos or any films that you make recoup. After that, I've put in a fairly healthy recording budget of £100,000. That will typically cover recording, demoing, mastering, and any producers that have to be covered out of that. And then figures for artwork and origination, and also a figure there for mastering. So total A&R cost of £390,000. And of course, all of that, with the exception of 50% of the video cost, will be recouped and therefore paid back by the artist out of royalties. The next area is marketing. Photo shoot we have there, and then 2 fairly large sums: radio interviews, TV appearances, and that is payments for appearances on to fund appearances at TV shows and appearances on radio shows. So it's the crew, it's maybe accommodation for the band if they have to travel to London, food, all of that sort of thing, crew, equipment hire. And some of that, sometimes that's not just in the UK initially, you know, there might be trips to France or Germany. So, you know, those sort of things can easily sort of be anywhere between £500 to £2,500, depending on where they are per trip. Again, at the moment, I've got in there radio, plugging, social media, press, and print advertising. I've put numbers in here for that at the moment, although we'll come on a bit later the fact that a lot of those services now are in-house at labels and dealt with by their in-house departments. But for the time being, I've put that in there as an allowance. And on occasions, major labels do hire in independent companies to do some or all of those services, but more and more they're discouraging that to make savings themselves and using in-house staff. And here we are, the in-house services that you get from a major label. They're sync marketing teams. I think that's an area of income that everybody hopes they can benefit from. And with a major label, because of the international setup, then a UK artist can benefit from sync teams working in New York, LA, being there in front of the people that are using music in TV and film. As I mentioned earlier, marketing, press officers and their teams in-house. And those teams can prioritise certain artist releases and therefore you've got, at the time of release, one hopes, a very focused group of people working, and again, not just in the UK, but internationally to promote the record. As I say there. And then also distribution. A number of the labels have their own distribution, although that doesn't effectively always wash down to the profitability or affect the artist share of income that's derived from the sale of records. It does come through considerably cheaper for a major than it will do for an independent label who have probably got to go and work with, in certain territories, distribution that's owned by a major. So, their variable costs. Marketing and promotion. When I've seen a few budgets, this can vary greatly, but certainly it usually appears to be around the 12 to 20%, sometimes as high initially as 25%, but it tends after, as sales take off, to reduce down more towards the 12 to 15% mark of turnover. Distribution, as I say, a variable cost, and generally speaking, for a major label, usually below 10%, I would say. Copyright, 8.5% roughly. And CD manufacturing, obviously, as a percentage of sales now, much reduced, but significantly cheaper than I'm sure either of you are encountering. I see costs ranging from 70p upwards, £1. Labels will always try and keep the cost of production down. They always want to minimise the number of inserts that go in a CD, the quality of packing, that sort of thing. So they want to keep the cost down on those sort of things. So overall, looking at this and assuming a sort of an additional print run of 30,000 units of CDs, you come up with, in comparison, a massive £530,038 overall of costs for an initial release, which is in a different in a different league really. But with what I think you're looking at here is that the major label is looking, generally speaking, at a worldwide release. They're looking at the backroom commitment they have from a large organisation. Obviously, they have their teams, they have their staff in place that are probably working on, over a year, hundreds of releases. So in a way, they're they're feeding a machine, and so their expectations of a release are generally much higher than an independent label or a self-releasing artist, because they are investing more money into that project. I've touched on some of this, but the international aspect of a major, there are pros and cons here, I think, for artists.
Sorry to interrupt you. I've just got to, we're kind of running a bit short of time. But I'd like to ask all three of you a question, actually about the second record. This is an initial release, and a second release is going to vary significantly. How do you think the costs are going to change? How much would, say, a major label be prepared to spend on a second release? How much, Lorraine, do you plan to spend on your second release? And how much, Alex, would you spend on a second release? Assuming that the first release hasn't lost everything.
In my perspective, there are certain costs which hopefully will be negated by the time you get to the second album, especially in relation to touring, which I think on debut acts and trying to establish an act in that market, that's for an indie, that can be quite heavy investment, trying to get live up to a level whereby it's sustainable for the act. So I would hope that by the time you get around to the second record, if you haven't lost too much money, that's the cost per track will actually come down. But there's the flip side, is if that debut record does exceedingly well, the expectation from the artist is to go and spend more time in more expensive studios, and maybe you spend more in other territories to try and bring that artist up to parity in export territories as the domestic home market. And the USA is one of those territories. If you choose to invest and work and concentrate on the US, it can suck an awful lot of money out of your wallet very quickly. So it does depend on the level of success of the first one.
Lorraine, how much do you intend to spend?
Well, ours was mostly based on in-kind before, and I said if we're going to do the second one, I need to try and raise more money for that. But actually the budget itself is quite similar, the amount, but it's cash this time as opposed to in-kind. So this time we're doing it in a different way. We've just recorded that. We brought on a new producer as well. We've brought on like a well-established producer. So that's
what Alex was talking about. The second album gets...
Yeah. And we're in the top studio as well. So we're really going for it this time.
And Lester, what's your experience for a second record? How much is the label going to spend?
Well, certainly, usually there's an increment in the living advance that goes to the band. I think by the second album, they are going to be looking, like Alex, to spend less on tour support. They may well be happy to commit more to marketing and promotion. And if the project does take off, then I think that is the true benefit of a major label. They have the money to immediately react and invest to grow an artist's career exponentially. The other side, of course, though, is that if the first album does not achieve, then you may well get dropped as an artist, and you may never get to make the second album. So I've been in situations where after the first album, artists have renegotiated their advance down to stay with a label if the label is still committed and wish to sort of market it in a different manner. But generally speaking, the harsh fact is that you may well get dropped.
Okay, thanks very much. So we've got about 5 minutes for questions from the floor. If anybody's got questions.
Less and less people are buying CDs, fewer and fewer buying CDs and albums. What about this whole streaming revolution and the financial impact that that's having on all three of you?
I've been doing this a long time, and if you've got a good solid act with good press, good radio support, well-established live, you do sell physical product first and foremost. the type of label that I am, we're our demographic, the people that buy our label, support our label, more often than not, actually want the lovely packaging in a vinyl packaging. Digital sales, we've noticed going up over the years. Streaming income, I factor into my digital income stream. I don't treat it separately from my digital statement that comes from my distributor. It's part and parcel of that. We have our catalogue on those streaming sites, but the revenue streams from that, it's not significant enough or different enough or affecting my other sales for it to be treated outside of digital income stream as same as downloads. You know, we sell digital downloads as much as many as we've ever done. And if anything, our digital revenue is going up because of the influence of streaming. But the monies you make back from streaming is not that great. It's not a considerable amount of income yet. But you know, it pays for us to be on those services for sure.
And not often, as well as Alex says, the actual income from streaming is relatively low, although a lot of the actual deals that are undertaken, I'm not privy to, so I really don't know. But certainly as an artist representative, the share that the artists receive is very low. But I think the other source of income, certainly I think that majors would receive, is shares of other income that relate to associated incomes with the use of music. So, for example, when you have a track being played on YouTube, there quite often it's played in conjunction with an advert for a car or a drink or something like that. So, it's not just the use of the music, but what the music is used with that generates the money for the music.
Lorraine?
Most of our sales are at concerts. So CD sales at concert is our main source of income. I don't think we're well known enough widely for people to be searching for us on streaming sites. So that's it.
Please thank Lester Dales, Lorraine Macaulay, and Alex Knight. Thank you.